America's Newsroom, I'm John Scott.
And I'm Alicia Acuna. Sandra and Bill are off today. Iranian President Rouhani laying down an ultimatum in a clear break from the Obama-era agreement, warning Europe the regime will take the next step in increasing its uranium enrichment to weapons-grade level unless a new nuclear deal is offered by Sunday. All this following Iran's recent provocations of attacking oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. European officials now pushing back.
In this context, we've called on Iran to reverse these steps and to refrain from further measures that would undermine the nuclear agreement.
Lucas Tomlinson is live at the Pentagon with more. Lucas?
Alicia, tensions with Iran once again flaring up after its president threatened to break through those caps on uranium enrichment beginning this Sunday.
From July 7th, our level of uranium enrichment will no longer remain at the 3.67 level. We will put this commitment to one side. We will increase the cap to whatever level we deem is essential for us and to a level that we need.
Uranium is the primary element needed to make nuclear weapons. President Trump walked away from the Obama-era nuclear deal last year. But other countries in the agreement, China, France, Russia, the UK, and Germany, are trying to hold the deal together and keep Iran from also walking away. President Trump has accused Iran of violating the nuclear deal and hopes another more wide-ranging agreement can be worked out.
We are working on Iran, and we'll see what happens. I think they'd like to make a deal. I think they'd be very smart to want to make a deal, but we're going to see what happens. I'm okay. I have all the time in the world. They're doing very poorly. They were very brutal when I first came in.
President Trump responded to his Iranian counterpart in a tweet, quote, "Iran has just issued a new warning. Rouhani says they will enrich uranium to any amount we want. But if there is no new nuclear deal, be careful with the threats, Iran. They can come back to bite you like nobody has been bitten before." Part of the president's salute to America included a B-2 stealth bomber capable of carrying nuclear weapons and a pair of advanced F-22 Raptors. These fifth-generation fighter jets deployed to Qatar last week as part of reinforcements ordered to the region to keep tabs on Iran. Yesterday, British Royal Marines seized an Iranian supertanker in Gibraltar near the entrance to the Mediterranean. National Security Advisor John Bolton responded in a tweet, quote, "Excellent news. UK has detained the supertanker Grace 1 laden with Iranian oil bound for Syria in violation of EU sanctions. America and our allies will continue to prevent regimes in Tehran and Damascus from profiting off this illicit trade." Today, a former member of Iran's Revolutionary Guard said Iran should take that tanker back by force. Alicia?
Lucas Tomlinson at the Pentagon. Thank you.
Here in the U.S., President Trump refuses to back down as he pushes to include a question about citizenship on the 2020 census. Government lawyers are rushing to find a legal basis after losing the latest battle in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. It's possible the president could issue an executive order to include the question. Here he is discussing his options earlier this week.
But they spend billions of dollars on the census, and you're not allowed to ask. You go knock on doors of houses, check houses. You go through all this detail, and you're not allowed to ask whether or not somebody is a citizen. So you can ask other things, but you can't ask whether or not somebody's a citizen. So we are trying to do that. We're looking at that very strongly.
Jamie Weinstein is host of the Jamie Weinstein Show podcast and the founding partner at JMW Strategies. So give us the rationale that the White House is relying on to include this citizenship question on the census, Jamie.
Well, this is something that they had tried to get into the census from nearly the beginning of the administration. What the Supreme Court ruled is that what the argument they were presenting to the court was a pretext. That was John Roberts. He was the main driver of that ruling. He's kind of the man that needs to be persuaded to either let this go on or not, because you have 4 and 4 on each side. And his view was that the argument they used, this was for the Voting Rights Act, because the DOJ requested it, was a pretext. So basically, he left the door open if there was a legitimate argument for this that he didn't think was a pretext for something else, that he might rule in their favor. But the only problem for the White House is that time is running out. In fact, they've already started having to print the census since the Supreme Court ruling without the citizenship question. So if they're going to have an alternative to try to get the court to rule in their favor, they have to act rather quickly.
Where do you think the president stands with regard to his power to invoke an executive action to put it on the ballot? I mean, he is the head of the administration, the administration of U.S. government. Why could the president not put that on?
Well, the argument for the president right now is, is propounded by Hugh Hewitt, the radio host, and also someone who teaches constitutional law, that if he made an executive order, met with his cabinet and presented a new reason, then they could petition the Supreme Court to examine this new reason through executive order. There's a mechanism where you can get a quick hearing in front of the Supreme Court, and perhaps that is their best avenue, maybe their only avenue, to try to get this census question on the census, the citizenship question on the census. Now, people counter that, saying, the Constitution is pretty clear on this. This is an Article 1 power. It's given to Congress is given the power of the census. So even an executive order wouldn't probably persuade Justice Roberts to then side with the administration. So it's really somewhat of a Hail Mary. But the president has that option. He's supposedly weighing the option of issuing the executive order. Again, time is of the essence here. They told the Supreme Court, they told the courts that they needed this settled by the end of June. As you might imagine, we are no longer in June, we're in July, and the census is already being printed. A
lot of people think that maybe this is something that hasn't been done before, but it's my understanding, and we've got sort of a graphic that describes this. The 2010 census under the Obama administration was the first one in 200 years that did not ask a question about whether the person filling out the census form was actually a citizen of the United States.
Yes, it's been done before, and it used to be common before 1950. I think this case would be that all the questions, I think in the Obama administration case, it was a portion of them, would have the citizenship question on it. And obviously, President Trump knows politics very well. To most Americans, it would make perfect sense to ask, are you a citizen or not? Or even to try to find out who is a legal immigrant in the United States and who is not an illegal immigrant in the United States. The other side would suggest that, obviously, if you are an illegal immigrant in the United States, you're not going to put that on and answer that question correctly. And in fact, if you are in a household where you might be a citizen, but someone who might not be here legally, you might not answer the question altogether. So that argument is that you would get an undercount of the exact population of the United States that would benefit Republicans. And that is really what the argument on the other side is, that this is a political move to benefit Republicans.
Yeah, well, Republicans say that this is all about being fair, I guess. I used the example yesterday in this discussion. California has an estimated 2.8 million illegal immigrants. If each of them is counted in the census, that amounts to 4 congressional seats, and then a whole lot of federal dollars that, without a congressional vote, federal dollars that flow to California as a result of the census numbers. So states like California have a vested interest in counting everybody, whether they are a legal American or not.
Well, then President Trump should blame the Commerce Department, because it seems very clear from the ruling that had they presented that argument, something that was straightforward and honest, that John Roberts probably would have allowed this census question to be put on, this citizenship question to be put on the census. Instead, he said that he can't, avert his eyes to what the evidence was there, and that the argument that the government was propounding, that the Commerce Department, the reason that they wanted here, was a pretext for something else. So if they were open and honest and gave that answer, perhaps the administration wouldn't be in this position. But in fact, because they gave what John Roberts thought was basically a lie, they were not being honest with the court, they are where they are.
All right. Well, all of the states that have lost congressional seats to states like California ought to pay close attention to what happens with regard to this citizenship question. Jamie Weinstein. Jamie, thank you.
Thank you.
Fox News alert as reports emerge of a second secret Facebook group connected to Customs and Border Protection. The page reportedly showing images mocking migrants and some lawmakers. Griff Jenkins is live in Washington. Hi, Griff.
Hi, Alicia. I'll tell you, an agency already at breaking point. More bad news. Fox News confirming CBP has opened an investigation into allegations of a second Facebook page, more inappropriate and derogatory comments towards migrants and lawmakers, including Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. These allegations, first brought to CBP by CNN, have been turned over to CBP's Office of Personal Responsibility. CBP issues this statement to Fox News. CBP received screenshots of social media posts allegedly by CBP employees and has shared those posts with the Office of Professional Responsibility, the office charged with investigating potential employee misconduct. OPR is investigating the post to determine the facts. If the investigation verifies an employee's posted content in violation of CBP's code of conduct, the findings will inform management decisions regarding appropriate disciplinary action. CBP does not tolerate misconduct on or off duty and will hold those who violate our code of conduct accountable. These posts do not reflect the core values of the agency and do not reflect the vast majority of employees who conduct themselves professionally and honorably every day on and off duty. This is the same policy as with the last week's allegations from ProPublica. The results shared with CBP management. Obviously, a determination will be made, and that could potentially result in dismissal or removal. All of this as Fox News also obtains an internal memo from July 3rd. Deputy Commissioner Robert Perez writing to all CBP employees regarding conduct and core values. In the memo, Perez writes this: the discovery earlier this week of some CBP employees engaging in disturbing social media activity is disappointing and unacceptable, and these activities undermine the credibility of our agency. The views expressed in those posts are deplorable and do not represent core values that we swear to uphold. Perez continues, quote, I am confident that the allegations that have surfaced in recent days do not represent the vast majority of our employees who faithfully execute our mission responsibilities, going above and beyond the call of duty every day. For some perspective, Alicia, a senior CBP official tells Fox News that they're surprised by both of these allegations last week and now this week, and that they take seriously every allegation of misconduct by their employees, but noted that they do not monitor the activities, online activities of 60,000 plus employees when they go home and log onto the computer. They're simply trying to get through all these allegations. They wanted to get to other ones. If there are more instances out there, they are actually encouraging anyone to report that to CBP so they can investigate that as well. Alicia?
Okay, Griff Jenkins, thank you so much.
Hillary Clinton's unsuccessful run for the White House casting a shadow over the field of 2020 Democrat wannabes. So what lessons can they take from her failed presidential bid as they try to win?
Plus, Iran sending mixed signals, apparently suggesting Tehran may be open to a meeting with Washington under certain conditions, even as it threatens to boost uranium enrichment if sanctions aren't lifted. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis on how the White House should respond next.
No message to Iran. They know what they're doing. They know what they're playing with. And I think they're playing with fire. So no message to Iran whatsoever.
Dramatic new video of a mall shooting. 2 suspects opened fire in Northern California, wounding 2 teenagers before running away. Investigators believe there were 2 groups of young people fighting on the mall's 2nd floor when a member of each group pulls out guns and begins shooting. The gunfire sparking panic, shutting down a nearby train station. One of the wounded teens is in critical condition, the other in serious.
We want to have peace. We want to build our roads and build our schools and build all the things we want to build. But we can't let Iran have a nuclear weapon. So they're having a lot of difficulty in their country right now. And hopefully at some point they'll come back and they'll say, we're going to make a deal.
President Trump on the prospects of reaching a nuclear deal with Iran, speaking to Tucker Carlson in South Korea after the G20 summit. But it's not clear if Iran wants to talk right now. Mixed messages out of Tehran as officials are saying they'll talk only if the supreme leader approves. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis is a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. Thank you so much for joining us here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Alicia. Appreciate it.
So right now we're getting these mixed signals from Iran on, yes, we want to talk, but we want the sanctions to go away before we talk. What should the White House do right now?
Yeah, I actually don't think the signals are mixed at all. I think they're very consistent, as they have been throughout. What Iran wants to do is to relieve the pressure. They don't have an open desire, according to our own intelligence service, to have a nuclear program. What they do want to do is to relieve this pressure. And so if we're willing to talk, if we want to talk, and they say they're willing to talk also, and that's a good sign because President Trump keeps saying that he's ready to have a new deal. The thing that we have to bear in mind, though, is that if you want to negotiate a better deal than the JCPOA, and be more stringent on Iran with the ballistic missiles, for example, that means we're going to have to be willing to give more than we did during that negotiation as well, and that's not going to sit well with some people. But if you want to resolve this, that may be necessary. Well,
and their talk continues to be so aggressive. How can you say we want to talk, but then also we're going to enrich uranium as high as we want, up to 90%, which would be weapons grade?
Well, they're actually not. Well, 90% is, but they're way far from that. They're not even up to 3.6% yet.
Right.
But their actions are not happening in a vacuum. See, from their perspective, their whole country is being choked off and suffocated. And so they're saying these things. And the reason why they shot down that drone the other day is to send a signal that, hey, we don't want war, but we're not just going to be strangled to death. And so they're sending measured signals so far, and we don't want to push too far. See, this whole maximum pressure campaign is only successful if it leads to an outcome that we want. But if we only put pressure and we don't even give them an alternative, then we're going to get more of these things, and that's where the risk of war comes in, whether by accident or otherwise, and that is not in our interest at all.
And this is a little separate, but it still speaks to exactly what we're dealing with here. As you know, yesterday, British Royal Marines seized an Iranian tanker because it believed that it was headed to Syria with crude oil, which would be a violation of European Union sanctions. In response, I want to put this up, this quote from a leader he's a major general and counselor to the Ayatollah, and it reads, if Britain does not release the Iranian oil tanker, it is the authorities' duty to seize a British oil tanker. It is their duty?
Right. Again, that's from their perspective. And that's one of these things about maximum pressure, which could potentially spark a war, which I was talking about, because those tankers have been going there for quite some time. This is nothing new. But the fact that they held it now, which Bolton lauded, that's actually evidence that we're trying to push the screws even tighter. And if we think that we're going to pressure them to where they'll capitulate, I think we're going to find that we actually push them into a position where they launch back. And if they do that, then all kinds of bad things can happen. We just can't push so hard that our own interests are harmed. And that's what I'm really saying we got to be careful of.
Okay, let's move to Russia now, because Russian President Vladimir Putin gave an interview to an Italian member of the media there, in which he said that he's ready to restart arms negotiations again. And I'll put up a quote and see what you think about this. He said, I think that the achievement of concrete agreements in the field of arms control would contribute to strengthening international stability. Russia has the political will to work towards this. Now it's up to the U.S. He's putting the ball in our court with the president. What do you think?
Right. And it is absolutely in our interest to work with Russia. Anything that limits, especially tactical nuclear weapons, is a win for everybody. Because this idea that some people have that you can use low-yield nuclear weapons and maybe it not spawn a nuclear war, I think is just delusional, because the likelihood is it's going to spark more. So if we have an agreement with Russia that limits that on both sides and maybe makes something better than the one that we had, the INF treaty, which was done during the Reagan administration in the 80s, the conditions are very different today. So if President Trump and Putin can work together and find something that matches today's situation and makes it so that we can actually validate that both sides are adhering to it, that's a big win for the United States and something that's important for all of us.
Okay. Lieutenant Colonel Daniel Davis, thank you so much for your time.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
Remember that presidential handshake over the weekend in North Korea? Now, a North Korean delegation accuses the U.S. of being, quote, hell-bent on hostile acts. So what does that mean for nuclear talks?
A strong jobs report for June. The Labor Department finding U.S. employers added 224,000 jobs last month, much higher than predicted. The unemployment rate rising slightly from 3.6% to 3.7% as more people encouraged by the strong job market begin searching for work. The robust job growth putting a damper on the market, though, as hopes for a Fed rate cut fade. The Dow down just a little bit right now, but the job market looking tight.
The family of the suspect arrested in the murder of a college student say they are worried he will not get a fair trial in Utah. Prosecutors say Ayula Ajayi kidnapped and killed Mackenzie Lewick last month. There are no official charges just yet, but the family's attorney says judgments are already being made based on limited police evidence and media coverage.
AJ is being crucified already. There's no way you can watch all this that is being said about your loving son and you'll be able to be at peace. Let him come before the court. Let him be tried. Let's see the evidence. Let the jurors do their work. And let's see the result.
David Bruno is a criminal defense and trial attorney, also a former prosecutor. So the family is claiming that this trial should be moved out of state. Have you ever heard of a criminal trial being moved to another state completely?
No, the answer is no. I mean, in Utah, they do have a statute and regulation that says that a case can be moved out of the county, but certainly does not talk about state. And by the way, it's so premature to even have this conversation. There aren't even charges yet. And let's look at the Boston bombing case, okay? Boston bombing, there was a city on lockdown. In fact, the jurors were actually on lockdown and considered victims of the crime. There was no move of venue there, nor is it going to happen here. Simply put.
Don't you have to go through some voir dire first and try and find a jury locally? And if you can't find a jury locally, then you can appeal?
Well, not necessarily. The motion to change venue can be moved prior to jury selection. But you bring up jury selection, that's where the judge is going to say, well, we have a system in place to ferret out taint and abuse. So the jury selection process is there to make sure that defendants get a fair trial, and that should be enough in this case.
The strange thing, too, is that the attorney is in New York, apparently is acquainted with his family in Nigeria, but he's in Salt Lake City, and she's not officially representing him yet. She's just kind of speaking for the family.
Right. Very early, right? I mean, an attorney is making public comments about a case without even being retained, nor is she even in Utah. So that brings up another question. Right? But again, this case is a sad one, no question. It's going to get pretrial publicity, but it's not going to be enough. Right now, they're reporting on the facts of the case, that there's electronic communications between the defendant and the victim prior to her missing, that witnesses saw him burning things in his yard, and they have DNA evidence of the victim in the yard. So you know what? They're reporting on facts. It's not going to be enough to transfer venue.
Well, the attorney, whether she officially represents him or not, I suppose you can credit her with trying to do as good a job as possible with what she's got to work with, huh?
Right. I mean, the reports are coming out are very, very damning against this defendant. And if all true, I think this is an open and shut case. And by the way, because there's a desecration of the human body, because the allegation is that he burned her, it's an aggravated murder, which is applicable for the death penalty in Utah.
And there were the reports from a handyman, a carpenter, who was reportedly asked by this suspect to build a sort of a secret soundproof room in the guy's basement.
Sure. Earlier this year, a couple months ago, you know, troubling. There's also reports coming out about a rape in 2014 that was not charged. The girl says that there was a consensual relationship that ended in a forceful rape. You know, so there's some of the reports that this attorney is talking about. But is it enough? Absolutely not. There's a jury selection process that's going to be enough for this case.
Fair justice prevails in this country, regardless?
Oh, absolutely. You know, even in the trial itself, that judge is going to sit on that bench and make sure that the evidence that comes through is the rules of evidence, that there's no hearsay, that it's fair, so that we could ultimately see the end verdict as a fair one.
David Bruno, thanks for your expertise.
You got it, John.
All right. Alicia.
Some new advice for 2020 Democrats, what they could learn from Hillary Clinton's failed bid for the White House, and what they're likely to ignore, possibly at their own peril. Plus, 3 stabbed and more than a dozen trampled at a fireworks event in Chicago as the city's new mayor pushes police to reduce violence.
One of the things I've emphasized since I became mayor is making sure that we are working across department lines in a collegial way and a cooperative way, and I'm really pleased with the progress that we've made.
To take no chances with gun violence on this 4th of July holiday weekend. The city's newly elected mayor and police commanders unveiling a plan to try to keep everybody safe and making it clear that is their #1 priority.
Our first goal of the weekend is the safety of our family and our residents. That's why over the next few days we'll be all hands on deck. As you might imagine, and we've talked about before, we've been preparing for these 4th of July festivities for some time.
Despite that, we're hearing about new violence at last night's fireworks event. Mike Tobin live at Chicago's Navy Pier with the latest. Mike.
And, John, by Chicago summertime standards, the gunfire we saw last night was pretty normal. What was unusual is the stampede that happened here at Chicago's Navy Pier. According to police, after the organized fireworks display, people were setting off their own firecrackers and things of that nature, and someone mistook that for gunfire.
At some point during the evening, while everyone was exiting, we believe that someone yelled gun. There were calls of shots fired at this time. There was a stampede. 14 individuals were injured in the stampede. They've been taken to area hospitals with non-life-threatening injuries.
Most of the injuries were people trampled in the stampede. One person was impaled in the leg when he ran into an upended table. Also, there were 3 people stabbed in the area here. According to police, just outside of Navy Pier, some teenagers were flashing gang signs. That started a fight. One person was stabbed in the armpit, another person was stabbed in the arm and in the rib, and a third person, who according to police was not involved in the fight, was stabbed in the face. Now, the new mayor, Lori Lightfoot, and Superintendent Eddie Johnson made a big effort to get out in front of the violence this holiday weekend. CPD had an additional 1,500 officers on the street. The Emergency Operations Center had been activated. Police also executed a big roundup ahead of the holiday weekend. Police say they nabbed some 38 illegal weapons. They arrested 170 people for guns and narcotics charges, took hundreds of thousands of dollars of narcotics off the street. But if you start counting at noon yesterday and you don't count suicides, there were 17 shootings in the city of Chicago. 3 of those ended up homicides. It's a sad number, but not that out of line compared to what we see when the weather gets warm in the bad parts of town. John?
They have to get their arms around the gunfire problem in that city. Mike Tobin, thank you.
I'm the only candidate which has a policy about how to bring economic opportunity using clean, renewable energy as the key into coal country, because we're going to put a lot of coal miners and coal companies out of business. Right, Tim? And we're going to make it clear that we don't want to forget those people.
Hillary Clinton went on to regret that remark, later admitting it was partly to blame for her defeat in 2016, and it could be a lesson for 2020 Democrats. Kimberly Strassel, writing in today's Wall Street Journal, swaths of the country now understand the economic pain of a climate regime, which they watched Mr. Obama implement through regulatory fiat. Every Democrat has vowed to make it a priority, and they have that Obama blueprint. They don't need Congress. Mr. Trump will make clear that the election of a Democrat guarantees an immediate return to struggling rural economies. Joining us now, Beverly Hallberg, Independent Women's Forum Fellow and President of District Media Group, Joel Rubin, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State under President Obama and President of Washington Strategy Group. Thank you both for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Joel, I'm going to start with you because every single Democratic candidate out there is talking about climate policy, and it goes much farther than the Obama era, which could be quite frightening to some people. What do you think?
Yeah, Alicia, it's clear the election in 2020 is going to run through the heartland and run through the Midwest, and climate policy matters there too. The question is how do Democrats talk about it? It has to be about jobs. It has to be about economic security, and there are real indicators that a cleaner environment can produce better jobs. We've seen it even in the energy sector, where renewable energy, wind and solar are taking off, and coal is on the decline. So that has to be communicated about why it's good for Americans, voters, in their pocketbook, and there is an argument to be made there.
But you're talking about a whole part of the country that is also very concerned about their pocketbooks. Joel,
Absolutely.
You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, absolutely. And these are the issues that Democrats ran on successfully in 2018, be it health care, be it the tax bill, frankly, and the tariffs now are coming up as an issue. All of these issues are critical, and Democrats do need to speak to actually the quality of life of people in the Midwest right now. But the climate agenda is not separate from that. This is integrated into all of these facets of our economy.
Beverly, do you have a response to that?
Well, when it comes to the energy policies that we're seeing, I think that the working class and Americans in general want us to have policies that are reasonable. What we're seeing from so many of the Democratic candidates are extremely extreme. You even saw when the Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez first came out with her Green New Deal, a lot of Democrats mocked it, yet so many of the candidates are now implementing some of those policies within their own plan. And the average American looks at that and says, look, I want us to have an environment that's clean. I think there's small steps we can take. I even think innovation leads to cleaner energies that we have out there. But they also know this means their jobs going away. When you take a look at the fracking industry or offshore drilling, so many jobs have been created as President Trump has rolled back so many of the regulations that President Obama put forward. So it seems that so many of these Democratic candidates seem out of touch with the working class, which is a voting bloc they're going to need if they're going to defeat Donald Trump.
But all Democrats aren't unaware of this issue that Democrats have. A lot of longtime Dems have raised this concern, and Kimberly Strassel points to it, and I'll bring up another quote here that she points out. Democrats are aware this is toxic for the working class voters they need to win back. That's why most lead with patronizing promises to invest billions to, quote, retrain entire communities. But ranchers, farmers, factory workers, and wildcatters don't want to be the guinea pigs of the left's green experiment. Joel, is there a risk here?
Well, there's always a risk if it's framed like that. But look at my native Pennsylvania. I'm from Pittsburgh originally. Natural gas is booming there, and it's replacing coal. And so energy change is happening right now. So asking folks to listen and think about it and retraining, it's not a patronizing policy. It's dealing with the reality as we know it. The clean plants, they work better and more efficiently. So we're going to have to, as Democrats, communicate that effectively. It's true. The Green New Deal, as a vision, it is inspiring to many Democrats and many Democratic voters. But as an action plan, it's very difficult to get the hands wrapped around it, and it's easy to parody. And so right now, Democratic candidates are getting stuck in the rhetoric of the Green New Deal, and so they need to bring it down a level as to explain how it actually can, if executed, provide jobs and provide a cleaner, safer environment for our future.
If I could jump in here, the reason why we do have so many of these good movements in Pennsylvania when it comes to the drilling and the fracking that's taking place has nothing to do with liberal policies. That is purely because you do have regulations that were rolled back, that were implemented during the Obama administration. It's been through private industry that we have seen so much clean energy emerge, and that's what we should be promoting.
Well, Beverly, we've seen a boom in renewables.
Can I just jump in here just really quick?
Yeah.
Excuse me, Joel. But Beverly, don't both parties really have to walk a balance here? Because it's not like there are Republicans who just don't care about climate change. There's a delicate balance for both parties.
Exactly. And one of the things you do hear Republicans talk about more is the fact that climate change does exist. The question is it as dire as we hear so many Democrats talk about? You have Democrats saying that the world is going to end in 12 years and we have to have these drastic policies. The reality is the messaging that's going to win is saying, look, innovation leads to cleaner energy. The United States is one of the leaders when it comes to clean energy in this country, and that is because we roll back regulation for innovation to take place. So there are steps that we can take on climate policies, but Democrats want to double down by taxing people and saying that industries have to go out of business because they're not clean enough. That is not only not resonating with the working class, but it also isn't the way forward for us to have clean energy as we continue to progress in this country.
And Joel, do you have a quick response to that?
Quickly, yeah, we're losing the jobs of the future to China right now because of our policies. They're building the future of solar energy. That's the fastest fastest growth sector in the energy economy. We can't afford to lose those jobs here at home, but we are because our policies aren't matching the moment.
Joel Rubin, Beverly Hallberg, thank you so much for joining us on this Friday. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A Georgia man is pulled from a burning mobile home, and the rescue all captured on camera. You're looking at body cam footage from the Clayton County Police Department. It shows police officers working with a neighbor to pull the unconscious man out of a burning mobile home on Monday morning. The neighbor suffered a burn on his arm, and 2 officers also were hurt. They were treated on the scene. Police say the man they saved ended up making a full recovery. Well, an unpatriotic act on the 4th of July ends with 2 arrests. The details on what happened here in D.C. Plus, President Trump's historic DMZ meeting with Kim Jong-un seemed to get nuclear talks back on track. Could that now be in jeopardy? Much more on that ahead.
I can just say that for 2.5 years, we've had peace. For 2.5 years, with nothing signed. It was just based on relationship.
Under arrest after protesters burned an American flag in front of the White House yesterday, setting off a clash with a group of counter-protesters. The 2 face a variety of charges, including malicious burning and felony assault on a police officer. Supporters of the flag burners will host a news conference a few hours from now to demand the charges be dropped.
North Korea accuses the U.S. of being, quote, hell-bent on hostile acts, despite that historic meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un at the DMZ. The comment comes in response to a letter sent to all UN member states last month, calling on nations to impose tougher sanctions on Pyongyang. North Korea's mission saying this in a statement: it is quite ridiculous for the United States to continue to behave obsessed with sanctions and pressure campaign against the DPRK, considering sanctions as a panacea for all problems. Harry Kazianis is director of Korea Studies at the Center for the National Interest. It's not unusual for North Korea to be sort of, constantly petulant and angry about the way it is treated. But after that history-making handshake between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, are you surprised at this response?
No, John, I'm not surprised at all, to be honest with you. This is what the North Koreans have always done. What they're actually doing is strategically signaling to Donald Trump. They're trying to say to him in the upcoming negotiations what they want, and what they want is sanctions relief. But also there's other signs coming out of North Korea, John, as well, that are actually positive. The North Koreans recently put out a 60-minute documentary, actually you can find it on YouTube, that shows President Trump walking into North Korea. And this was shown to all of the North Korean people on their state news broadcasts. It actually even shows Ivanka Trump shaking hands with Kim Jong-un. So I think we have to look at the negative signs, but something like that to show America in a positive light on North Korean state TV, I've been looking at North Korea for over a decade, and I've never seen something like that. So the president deserves a lot of credit. His approach is working.
All right, but if they want sanctions relief, they know how to accomplish that, don't they? Can't they take more positive steps to end their nuclear program or end their ballistic missile program?
Absolutely. And I think what's going to happen here is we're going to have a tough round of working level negotiations. I think what the North Koreans are desperate for is 2 things. Sanctions relief when it comes to coal exports and textile exports. That gives them billions of dollars of revenue to do everything they need to do to power their economy and hopefully, let's say, feed their people. But I think the president needs to stand firm here and really make sure that they give us something big in return, which one thing would be the Yongbyon nuclear facility. If they do that, I think we could suspend those 2 sanctions for 1 year, and let's see if the North Koreans keep their word.
The president says he is patient. Here is a sample of what he had to say regarding North Korea and denuclearization talks. Listen.
Speed is not the object. We want to see if we can do a really comprehensive good deal. Nobody knows how things turn out. And what's going to happen is over the next 2 or 3 weeks, the teams are going to start working to see whether or not they can do something.
So there are talks going on behind the scenes, Harry.
Yeah, they're not yet. They're going to have working level talks led by Steve Biegun and overseen by Mike Pompeo. And I'll be honest, Sean, they're going to be very, very tough negotiations. The North Koreans are going to ask for a lot, and we're going to ask a lot for return. But I think the approach the president is taking is working, and it's been truly sad to see Democrats actually make North Korea a campaign issue when the president has actually shown real courage and guts to get us this far. I mean, let's face it, Kim Jong-un might have not even gone to the DMZ, and the president would have taken the heat on that. So I think he has a great approach here. Like you said, we have to see what happens, but so far, we're in a good spot.
Kim Jong-un and his father before him have frustrated every